Let's get to our panel right now. Joining us here in Washington is Aykan Erdemir. He's a former member of the Turkish Parliament. Namo Abdulla is the Washington bureau chief for Rudaw, the media network from the Kurdistan region in Iraq. With us from San Francisco is writer and political analyst Goran Zaneti. And Ismael Alsodani is a retired brigadier general of the Iraqi army and a strategic analyst for the Middle East. Welcome to all of you. Now, let me start with you. So the Iraqi Kurds have had this plebiscite. They've voted overwhelmingly to secede from Iraq, 93% voting yes. But the government, the central government in Baghdad, says there is no legal basis for this referendum. Question is, why was it held and where do you go to from here?
Well, the Kurdish question is a century-old question, at least, for statehood. The Kurds were supposed to have an independent nation-state of their own after the Ottoman Empire collapsed in the early 20th century. But they didn't get it back then because, the European power didn't want to. And they've been fighting ever since for statehood. So this plan was supposed to happen before, in 2014. Iraqi Kurds were supposed to hold a referendum then, but ISIS advanced toward Kurdistan, paused that. Now Barzani felt that it is the time.
That's the Kurdish leader.
It is the time to hold this referendum because, to be frank, Barzani's argument kind of makes sense when he says Iraq has either failed to protect us or has been too strong to attack us. It's been too weak to protect us or too strong to attack us. That's been his argument.
But the question is that there was no legal basis for this referendum.
Iraqi government says it's unconstitutional, but according to the regional laws, which are recognized by the Iraqi laws, it was legal. And according to the Iraqi constitution, some constitution scholars argue that Iraq is a voluntary union. In other words, anybody can drop out of that union whenever they like.
Ismail, do you agree with that Iraq is a voluntary union?
I disagree totally. It's unconstitutional. There is any article in the constitution has made it clear that any ethnicity can secede by itself and held a referendum and independent from the central government. That's why I think this is, one of the questions has been forwarded or directed to the Kurdish leadership that they haven't followed the proper sequences that should be followed by bringing Baghdad and Erbil together to the dialogue if they are intended to, get the independency. But because it is unilateral step from the Kurdish leadership, I believe this is a violation to the constitution. And they claim that Iraqi government has violated 55 articles in the constitution. But in my perspective, this personal perspective, any violation to the constitution shouldn't be treated by violation to the constitution.
Right, so if I'm hearing you correctly right now, you're not ruling out independence, you're just saying that there wasn't a proper procedure followed.
Well, I'm not in a position to speak on behalf of Iraqi government, right. But there is no article, again, in the constitution has stated that any ethnicity or particular region in Iraq could hold a referendum to declare independency. Otherwise, we would have seen more, provinces would declare independency. For instance, Basra always saying that we are, providing Iraq with 90% of their revenue in the budget, and we get nothing from that.
But there is no law in the Iraqi constitution that says you're not allowed to hold a referendum or declare independence either. There is one thing in the preface of the constitution that says Iraq is a voluntary union.
Okay. I want to move on. Aykan, we have Turkey. Turkey has a Kurdish population of 15 million. No doubt they're watching these developments in Iraqi Kurdistan very, very closely. What is the Turkish policy? It seems to be very ambivalent. The president was open negotiations with the Kurds at one point. Now it's changed.
Now, I think it's important to start by remembering that Turkey's policy have evolved radically over the years. It was President Erdogan who actually led the drastic change in Turkey's policy toward Iraqi Kurds. You know, more than a decade ago, Turkish public and policymakers were extremely hostile to Kurdish leaders, both Barzani and Talabani and others. And under Erdogan, there was an attempt to start a mutually beneficial political and economic cooperation. We saw enormous volumes of trade between the two, energy cooperation. But in the run-up to the referendum, we see a backsliding. Suddenly, Turkey seems to be the Turkey of 1990s. There is an enormous reaction, not only to the Kurdish leadership, but there is a lot of vitriol targeting Kurds on both sides of the Turkish-Iraqi border. And today, I think Turkish policymakers in general echo the Iraqi sentiments in Baghdad. That is, this is against the Iraqi constitution.
What happened in Turkey that caused that change? Was it domestic politics?
I think in general, the Turkish policymakers are concerned about Iraqi Kurds' independence because they think that it can spill over to the Turkish side. But the more immediate cause for the radical change is the upcoming 2019 elections and Erdogan's wish to cater to the nationalist voter base.
Okay, let's bring in Goran. He's in San Francisco. Goran, let's look at a bit of history here. The Kurds have been wanting their own state, as Namo pointed out, since the fall of the Ottoman Empire at the end of World War I. Right now, what do you see as the main obstacles to that happening, and what is the position of Iranian Kurds?
Well, the difficulties are obviously that the Kurdistan region of Iraq is landlocked, and so it requires a cooperation from one of the neighboring states. A lot of bets were made that Turkey would be the state that would provide the outlet for Iraqi Kurds to have trade with the rest of the world. But you know, the immediate reaction from Turkey has obviously been negative. Now, I don't think that this will continue. Turkey stands to benefit greatly from the Iraqi Kurds and the Kurdistan region in general. It is the only part of Iraq that generally has very positive relations with Turkey. There's trade that amounts to something like $8 billion between Turkey and Iraq. A substantial amount of that is with the Kurdistan region. So I think that the immediate response from Turkey is not necessarily what will be carried out in the coming months. I think we might see a bit of change. You know, relations between Turkey and Iraq have been up and down. In 2007, we saw the same sort of tit-for-tat threats being made by then Prime Minister Erdogan and President Barzani, and those relations were eventually improved with pressure from the United States. As far as Iranian Kurds and the position of Iran, I think Iran has a lot more to lose in terms of Kurdistan breaking away from Iraq. Iran has a lot of influence in Baghdad, has the ear of many politicians, as well as political parties in Baghdad. The relations with Kurds has generally been well, but the risk for Iran is a Kurdish state on their border could possibly be used by, you know, the United States, for example, as a launching pad for attacks on Iran. This is what the Iranians are afraid of. And I think, as well, they have their own Kurdish population, but I think that's really a secondary concern for them.
Namo, we had this referendum which took place. It just took place in the Iraqi part where Kurds are living. What is the intention here ultimately? Would there be just independence for that part of Iraq, or are you looking at independence for all those regions encompassing 3 or 4 countries?
Yeah, the referendum took place not only in the areas called the Kurdistan region, or the areas that are recognized by Iraq as Kurdistan region, the so-called Green Line. They were held beyond the Green Line as well, in the so-called disputed territories, where like Kirkuk is the most prominent oil-rich city in the disputed territories. Baghdad doesn't find it provocative that Kurdistan held the referendum in those areas. But Kurdistan says those areas were left by the Iraqi army in 2014. The Iraqi army evaporated when ISIS advanced toward those cities. It was the Peshmerga who shed blood and took those areas. We're not going to give them back. That's why they're saying, because these areas are not, there are significant Kurdish populations in these areas. Kirkuk, the Kurds argue, is a majority Kurdish city. They see it as their Jerusalem, and they say they would not give it back.
Ismael, are there disputed areas there?
Yeah, I think disputed areas in the Constitution should have, there is an Article 140 and should, solve the disputed areas between the regional government and the Iraqi central government. Right. After 2014, the Peshmerga has moved, and after ISIS, they have captured the ground, and they fought ISIS in that area. Of course, Peshmerga, as KRG, consider themselves as part of Iraqi security forces, is not an isolated forces, because always Kurdistan regional government requesting equipment and
right.
their payment. However, conducting this referendum in the disputed areas without any constitutional basis for holding this kind of referendum in these disputed areas without solving this problem by the Constitution, it is also a violation of the Constitution. And that, I think, the United States has already expressed their concerns about it.
Okay,
I'd like to comment on that.
Yeah.
I think that there is really no, as you stated, there's no articles in the Iraqi Constitution that prohibit holding a referendum on independence or even holding a referendum in the disputed areas. As you mentioned, Article 140 was supposed to resolve this issue through a normalization process to revert the demographics of the region back to pre-Saddam.
That's not the question. The question is, since we are voluntarily accepting, and Kurdish leadership has participated substantially in writing this constitution, they have accepted to solve this problem within the constitution framework. Otherwise, sending the troops, sending the forces over there, and imposing and making the fait accompli policy, that wouldn't be healthy for both Iraq and Kurdistan as well.
Goran, your response very quickly, and then I need to take a break.
Well, I think it's important to note that Kurdish forces didn't move into the disputed territories, arbitrarily. Iraqi forces withdrew when ISIS attacked, and therefore Kurdish forces were providing security there. But I think it's really a matter of, going back to the violations of the Iraqi Constitution by the central government, and particularly Article 140, which would normalize the situation in the disputed territories and institute a referendum that would allow them to decide whether to join the Kurdistan region. Kurdistan did unilaterally, admittingly, hold their own referendum, but this question on independence also included whether the disputed territories wanted to be part of the Kurdistan region.
Right.
So in effect, they've actually implemented Article 140 on their own.
Okay, we are going to take a quick break right now, and then we'll return to discuss more on Kurdistan on that referendum. Stay with us.